So I wanted to talk a little bit about this video, especially in just kind of how speakers can pervert truth in such ways. I came across this video, it was just in my feed, and all these kinds of presentations are alluring to me because they're banned TED Talks, and whenever these people get banned, they always make it seem like they're trying to be deplatformed and some establishment is after them. Um, but I just wanted to record my live take to this, so let's watch this video and see. This is by the after school people. They always do like a little draw my life sort of thing by this.
The science delusion is the belief that science already understands the nature of reality in principle, leaving only the details to be filled in.
Um, so the science delusion. So this is interesting. If you think about science, especially how it's been utilized in the past few years, especially on the political stage, um, there is certainly a discretion between science as a philosophy and as a mental tool to arbitrate between fact and fiction, and the science, which is dogmatic. So the belief that science already understands the nature of reality is a dogmatic perversion of a tool.
This is a very widespread belief in our society. It's the kind of belief system of people who say, I don't believe in God, I believe in science.
I don't know if that is exactly corollary. Um, yeah, there are people who are agnostic or atheists who prop up the idea of science to fill in the gaps, but I don't know if that's necessarily dogmatic or saying that there's more rationale in where you can derive your answers of the universe from.
It's a belief system which has now been spread to the entire world. But there's a conflict in the heart of science between science as a method of inquiry based on reason, evidence, hypothesis, and collective investigation, and science as a belief system or a
Yeah, so this is
worldview.
what I was saying earlier.
And unfortunately, the worldview aspect of science has come to inhibit and constrict the free inquiry, which is the very lifeblood of the scientific endeavor.
I'll actually agree with this. Having like very dogmatic approaches, especially in research, is hindering like there are things which are very well reported on which are not worth conjecture, like various scientific laws or things we've known for a long time, very fundamental aspects to various disciplines where I mean it's been proven time and time again, but especially on the more frontier aspects, going in dogmatically is abusing the tool of science.
Since the late 19th century,
We do need free conjecture for results. Like if people are afraid to disagree, then that's not a particularly productive system of inquiry. But in order to go against someone's results, you should have sufficient evidence. If you don't have sufficient evidence and you're just going off of the vibes, that's not particularly adequate.
Science has been conducted under the aspect of a belief system or worldview, which is essentially that of materialism, philosophical materialism. And these sciences are now wholly owned subsidiaries of the materialist worldview. I think that as we break...
I don't particularly understand how he's looping materialism into this. That seems kind of tangent.
out of it, the sciences will be regenerated. What I do in my book, The Science Delusion, which is called Science Set Free in the United States, is take the 10 dogmas or assumptions of science and turn them into questions, seeing how well they stand up if you look at them scientifically.
I didn't know that there were assumptions, so that's news to me. You know, like it's very easy to make a straw man of something and then tear it down. I hope it's not a straw man fallacy.
None of them stand up very well. What I'm going to do is first run through what these 10 dogmas are, and then I'll only have...
Of course there's 10 dogmas. If there's 9 dogmas, it's like, oh, that's not complete. There has to be like 10. 11 dogmas, oh, that's too many. There has to be 10. It's a nice round number. And I'm sure that these are all contrived from reality.
Have time to discuss one or two of them in a bit more detail.
The 10 commandments.
But essentially the 10 dogmas, which are the default worldview of most educated people all over the world, are first that nature is mechanical or machine-like. The universe is like a machine, animals and plants are like machines, we're like machines. In fact, we are machines. We're lumbering robots, in Richard Dawkins' vivid phrase, with brains that are genetically programmed computers.
So nature is mechanical. I think mechanical is the wrong word. Nature's mechanistic. Things happen for a reason, and they're predictable. Like if you take Tylenol, you can predict that your pain's going to go away. That's the mechanism of Tylenol, to relieve you of that pain. Like, if you can't form any prediction from substantiated evidence, then it's not scientific. You're just playing the slot machine. I mean, are not like mechanical devices mechanistic in that sense? Like if you turn a lever, your circuit will activate. I mean, it's you can draw comparisons between machines we make and people. I'm not really sure why this is dogmatic.
Second, matter is unconscious. The whole universe is made up of unconscious matter. There's no consciousness in stars, in galaxies, in planets, in animals, in plants, and there ought not to be any in us either, if this theory is true. So a lot of the philosophy of mind over the last 100 years is trying to prove that we're not really conscious at all.
I think this is kind of sloppy because you need a definition of consciousness. Like, does matter have hopes and dreams and loves and hatred? That has not been substantiated by any evidence. I mean, look at like a rock. Does a rock like have the capacity to love? No, it doesn't even have the capacity to do much of anything except sit there. But are we all made of the same things? Are we all part of like the collective aspects of the universe? Of course. I mean, it really depends how you define consciousness. This is another kind of arbitrary thing.
So the matter's unconscious, then the laws of nature are fixed. This is dogma 3. The laws of nature are the same now as they were at the time of the Big Bang, and they'll be the same forever. Not just the laws, but the constants of nature are fixed, which is why they're called constants.
This one's kind of interesting. The constantness of a law in science is really down to the how particular of a law of how particular your definition is. If you're very generalistic, then your constants and things will change. But if you're very specific in your definition, then it should always be constant. It's measurable in those same conditions. I mean, from that's it's just a lot to process. He's casting a very wide net here to allure people in to sow some sort of he's kind of making a straw man here.
Dogma 4, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. It never changes in total quantity, except at the moment of the Big Bang, when it all sprang into existence from nowhere in a single instant.
I mean, he's alluring to the second law of thermodynamics, which is the spontaneity of the universe is always increasing depending on the chemical reaction or the reactions which take place, and energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred, which is reductionist. Things will spread out till essentially there's a heat death of the universe and nothing can exist anymore, as all the particle motion has been exhausted. I guess he is right if he's saying, I mean, if we're dogmatic and we already have our answer and we don't want to look as to what caused the Big Bang or how that was even possible within this law, I guess it's kind of a contradiction. But these people really don't like the answer that of we don't know yet. Like there always has to be an answer. That's their selling point. If we're going to be truthful and say, oh, we don't have all the answers yet, especially in very broad, kind of ambiguous totalities like he's discussing.
The fifth dogma is that nature is purposeless. There are no purposes in all nature, and the evolutionary process has no purpose or direction.
I'm gonna have to disagree with him. Nature, I mean, purpose is subjective. Nature, like evolution, occurs in order to suit a niche in the environment. That's what allows good designs to progress through time, and others are eliminated. Theoretically, it's like very broad. But mutation is sometimes random, sometimes directed mutagenesis. But to say that there's no direction is partially a gross oversimplification of understanding the system of evolution. You have to disregard, I guess, the fact that change can occur, or it's fatalistic. You have to see the outcome to determine the purpose of a change. If you can't see the outcome, then everything seems purposeless, right? It's like this is overtly pessimistic. I mean, he's looping in too much personal appeal in this dogma.
Dogma 6, the biological heredity is material. Everything you inherit is in your genes, or in epigenetic modifications of the genes, or in cytoplasmic inheritance.
I mean, DNA is the hereditary material. Um, that I don't know why this is dogmatic. I mean, it's not really well defined. What makes you biologically is the fusion of the genome of both of your parents to make you, but I mean that's not what makes you entirely human. There's your experiences and your other things you get through development in living life, but or you can be impacted by environmental factors like viruses or how you're how well you're living, for instance. But I mean, heredity is the flow of the genetic information from one generation to another. Like it, that's how children inherit like mutations from their parents that way, and we can pinpoint the genes on those, which is material. I don't know why he's so against this.
It's material. Dogma 7, memories are stored inside your brain as material traces. Somehow everything you remember is in your brain in modified nerve endings, phosphorylated proteins. No one knows how it works, but nevertheless, almost everyone in the scientific world believes it must be in the brain.
We don't know how it works, but we so if you cut out the memory region of your brain and you don't remember anything, or you go through Alzheimer's where the memory part of your brain is degraded and you don't remember anything, although we don't know how it works specifically, you're saying that that's dogmatic. I'm not particularly convinced. I think this is a weak point. These are just kind of silly to say that these are
Dogma 8, your mind is inside your head. All your consciousness is the activity of your brain and nothing more.
I think he's kind of grasping at the Carl Jung idea of a collective consciousness here, where we're all kind of on the same vibe. Maybe I'll give this one, but his definitions are so like rigid and arbitrary. He's like contorting his argument to be basically whatever he wants. So there's no way he can be wrong here because he's just not defining anything.
Dogma 9, which follows from Dogma 8, psychic phenomena like telepathy are impossible. Your thoughts and intentions cannot have any effect at a distance because your mind's inside your head.
Okay. I don't really know what to say about this. He kind of took a little bit of a large step from 8 to 9, going to telepathy and the transfer of energy by the mind. Is it possible? Perhaps, if you're on like extreme doses of psychedelics. But then again, are you really in your right mind? Why do you have to be on hallucinogenic materials to engage with this phenomenon? Why can't you just do it in your sober state? I mean that this is kind of getting a little ridiculous here. I don't know why this is
Therefore,
dogmatic.
all the apparent evidence for telepathy and other psychic phenomena is illusory. People believe these things happen, but it's just because they don't know enough about statistics, or they're deceived by coincidences, or it's wishful thinking.
Oh, that's the other thing they do. All the studies doesn't give like a specific example. It's just every study, and then they don't know about statistics or illusion or how your brain can be affected by certain materials which can induce this phenomenon. But all the studies say that, and somehow the entire community is wrong. And some dude On the internet's right. What are the chances?
And dogma 10, mechanistic medicine is the only kind that really works. That's why governments only fund research into mechanistic medicine and ignore complementary and alternative therapies. Those can't possibly really work because they're not mechanistic. They may appear to work because people would have got better anyway, or because of the placebo effect. But the only kind that really works is mechanistic medicine.
Oh, so because we know what a drug does, well, the FDA doesn't even require you to know the mechanism of a drug. It just has to be safe and effective. So this point is kind of mute. But because we know the mechanism, we can design more effective drugs to treat diseases. And I mean, if you consider the fact that the more mechanistically designed drugs we have, the higher or the longer people are living, and the more or diseases are reduced. I mean, I don't know what he's talking about in non-mechanistic medicine, like crystal people or the essential oils or doing those sorts of things. I mean, there's a reason why it died out, right? Because it doesn't work.
Well, this is the
Unless, I mean, you're talking about psychology. I don't know if that's like the there's some contention with the efficacy of SSRIs in curing depression, but I mean, there could be a rational way to solve depression. I mean, outside of using a drug agent. I mean, knowing how something works, and showing a clear rationale for that is fundamental. You just want to be treated off the vibes. I don't think anyone would be particularly inclined to do that.
default worldview, which is held by almost all educated people all over the world. It's the basis of the educational system, the National Health Service, the medical.
It's held in such high regard because it's based off of rational thought, which is we are supporting our statements from evidence where it's repeatable and replicable. If you don't do that, then you could just prove anything.
Research Council, governments, and it's just the default worldview of educated people. But I think every one of these dogmas is very, very questionable. And when you look at it, they fall apart.
So he made 10 straw man fallacies with loose definitions, and then he's going to show why they're wrong. So he's misrepresenting arguments, and then he's going to show that they're bad because they're misrepresented. Wow. What a philosopher of our age.
I'm going to take first the idea that the laws of nature are fixed. This is a hangover from an older worldview before the 1960s when the Big Bang Theory came in. People thought that the whole universe was eternal, governed by eternal mathematical laws. When the Big Bang came in, then that assumption continued, even though the Big Bang revealed a universe that's radically evolutionary, about 14 billion years old, growing and developing and evolving for 14 billion years, growing and cooling, and more structures and patterns appear within it. But the idea is all the laws of nature were completely fixed at the moment of the Big Bang, like a cosmic Napoleonic code.
Yeah, you just have to be very discreet about what you're defining with a law, and it's the same because it's measured to fit that instance. Like, did the speed of was the speed of light the same throughout the universe? No, light doesn't always travel at the speed of light. Light can move slower or faster, depending on what media it goes through. But 100% of the time, if you measure the speed of light with the same criteria, like in a vacuum, at the same temperature and control all those variables, it's the same. It's constant because all the variables are the same. If we couldn't predict that, then we couldn't do science because everything's just random.
As my friend Terence McKenna used to say, modern science is based on the principle, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. And the one
Okay.
free miracle is the appearance of all the matter and energy in the universe and all the laws that govern it from nothing in a single instant.
Not really from nothing in a single instance, from a finite collection of all of the energy in the universe. It's very hard to make this argument if you're going to be so philistine about rational thought and evidential thinking.
Well, in an evolutionary universe, why shouldn't the laws themselves evolve? After all, human laws do, and the idea of laws of nature is based on a metaphor with human laws. It's a very anthropocentric metaphor. Only humans have laws. In fact, only civilized societies have laws. As C.S. Lewis once said, to say that a stone falls to earth because it's obeying a law makes it a man and even a citizen.
It's to say that a stone falls to earth because it's obeying a law. It's not obeying the law. The law exists independent of our perception of the law. The law is just our description of the phenomenon. They're not human laws where you have to where they're formed by the collective agreement. There's no agreement. It just happens because of various mechanistic understandings.
It's a metaphor that we've got so used to, we forget it's a metaphor. In an evolving universe, I think a much better idea is the idea of habits. I think the habits of nature evolve. The regularities of nature are essentially habitual. This was an idea put forward at the beginning of the 20th century by the American philosopher C.S. Peirce. And it's an idea which various other philosophers have entertained, and it's one which I myself have developed into a scientific hypothesis, the hypothesis of morphic resonance.
Oh, here we go. Here's what he's selling us, morphic resonance. No idea what that is, but I'm sure there's not going to be any flaws with this in an evolutionary universe. No shit. Things change throughout time because the variables change throughout time.
Which is the basis of these evolving habits.
Oh,
according
he's the only person to ever realize this. People have been alive for 10,000 years, and he's the first person ever to realize this. How lucky are we?
to this hypothesis, everything in nature has a kind of collective memory.
Collective memory.
Resonance occurs on the basis of similarity. As a young giraffe embryo grows in its mother's womb, it tunes in to the morphic resonance of previous giraffes.
What?
It draws...
Why? Can you just define what morphic resonance is before just getting into the examples? Like that would just make like sense, so I could figure out what's going on here. He keeps jumping between like subjects too, like between biology and physics and all these different domains. It makes it kind of hard to understand what he's talking about.
On that collective memory, it grows like a giraffe and it behaves like a giraffe because it's drawing on this collective memory. It has to have the right genes to make the right proteins.
I thought heredity had nothing to do with that. Why are you talking about genes and proteins now?
But genes, in my view, are grossly overrated. They only account...
Genes are overrated.
For the proteins that the organism can make, not the shape or the form or the behavior.
I think an evolutionary biologist or a cell biologist would highly differ. There's whole families of genes like Hox genes, which help with development. There's more pervasive transcription factors like MYC, which will cause gene expression to a wide variety of genes around the genome so that you can make a whole new cell. You have to basically print off a lot of new proteins to make a whole new cell, and it goes through the cell cycle in that regard. But if you're saying the genes don't matter to biology, then why are we studying biology and genomics? This is a very Philistine approach, and you have to ignore so many things in order for this to make sense. It's frankly ridiculous.
Every
If only he could provide like one example where the genome doesn't influence the phenotype. I would frankly love to see that.
species has a kind of collective memory. Even crystals do. This theory predicts that if you make a new kind of crystal for the first time, the very first time you make it, it won't have an existing habit. But once it crystallizes, then the next time you make it,
What do you mean?
there'll be an influence from the first crystals to the second ones all over the world by morphic resonance. It'll crystallize a bit easier.
What?
The third time,
It's because of the chemistry of the crystal. It's an inherent property of the matter. It doesn't like learn how to form those crystals. It's because of the chemistry and the interactions. They don't just learn through a collective conscious. I don't know. I think this guy might have done too many mushrooms. He may be lost.
there'll be an influence from the first and second crystals. There is, in fact, good evidence that new compounds get easier to crystallize all around the world, just as this theory would predict. It also...
New compounds get easier to crystallize. Maybe because the recipe gets refined. Like, he doesn't show the evidence. He's like, yeah, there is evidence. Just trust me, bro.
It predicts that if you train animals to learn a new trick, for example, rats learn a new trick in London, then all around the world, rats of the same breed should learn the same trick quicker just because the rats have learned it here.
What?
And surprisingly, there's already evidence that this
There's
actually
evidence.
happens.
I'm not going to show you the evidence, though.
Anyway, that's my own hypothesis in a nutshell.
I mean, he's just said. This is a good example of recognizing a con man. They're like, there's evidence, and he tries to assume the fault. He's a false authority figure. He's just spouting nonsense. He's constructed false arguments and torn them down with other strange rationales and tried to really hype himself up by saying there's evidence and it's supporting and everyone's ignoring me. But it's because he's a bullshit artist.
Of morphic resonance. Everything depends on evolving habits, not on fixed laws.
Again, this is another straw man. Everything depends on evolving habits. The habits aren't evolving. It's just kind of a nonsense statement. Like, laws have nothing to do with what he's trying to talk about evolving habits.
But I want to spend a few moments on the constants of nature, too.
Oh, boy.
Because these are, again, assumed to be constant. Things like the gravitational constant, the speed of light, are called the fundamental constants.
Fundamental constants.
Are they really constant?
Yes.
Well, when I got interested in this question, I tried to find out. They're given in physics handbooks. Handbooks of physics list the existing fundamental constants and tell you their value. But I wanted to see if they'd changed, so I got the old volumes of physical handbooks.
I'll bet you my entire net worth that they do change as time progresses because we got better at measuring them and forming a more concrete definition.
I went to the Patent Office Library here in London, and they're the only place I could find that kept the old volumes. Normally people throw them away when the new values come out. They throw away the old ones. When I did this, I found that the speed of light dropped between 1928 and 1945 by
Wow, it's almost like the measuring of the speed of light could have changed.
about 20 kilometers per second. It's a huge drop because they're given with errors of any fractions of decimal points of error. And yet, all over the world, it dropped. And they were all getting values very similar to each other with tiny errors. And then in 1945, it went up, 48, it went up again. And then people started getting very similar values again.
Maybe the definition changed. Like maybe in 1948, they're like, maybe we should measure the speed of light in a vacuum because the photons are hitting particles and slowing down the speed of light.
I was very intrigued by this, and I couldn't make sense of it. So I went to see the head of metrology at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington. Metrology is the science in which people measure constants. Mm-hmm. And I asked him about this. I said, what do you make of this drop in the speed of light between 1928 and 1945? And he said, oh dear, he said, you've uncovered the most embarrassing episode in the history of our science. So I said, well, could the speed of light have actually dropped?
Oh.
And that would have amazing implications if so. He said, no, of course it couldn't have actually dropped. It's a constant. So, well then how do you explain the fact everyone was finding it going much slower during that period? Is it because they were fudging their results to get what they thought other people should be getting, and the whole thing was just produced in the minds of physicists? We don't like to use the word fudge. I said, well, what do you prefer? He said, well, we prefer to call it intellectual phase locking.
If everyone's using the same method and getting the same results, that's showing that it is repeatable. If it was changing, why would it change in that period and be like constant from 1948 till now? Like, what about before that? All of those big error bars he was showing.
So I said, well, if it was going on there,
happened too. I'm sure he went through this whole debacle. I'm sure this isn't something that happened in his head.
And how can we be so sure it's not going on today? And that the present values are produced by intellectual phase locking. And he said, oh, we know that's not the case. I said, how do we know? He said, we've solved the problem. And I said, well, how? He said, well, we fixed the speed of light by definition in 1972.
It's like, they're changing the definition to fit their claims so that they can be Philistine and ignore the morphic resonance of the speed of light. We're just the people that measure the speed of light are fitting it to a definition because you have to measure it in a vacuum. As I just said previously, the particles can interfere with the speed and you're going to get a different measurement.
So I said, but it might still change. He said, yes, but we'd never know it because we've defined the meter in terms of the speed of light. So the units had changed with it. So he looked very pleased about that. They'd fixed that problem. But I said, well, then what about big G, the gravitational constant known in the trade as big G? It's written with a capital G, Newton's universal gravitational constant. That's varied by more than 1.3% in recent years. And it seems to vary from place to place and from time to time. And he said, oh, well, those are just errors. And unfortunately, there are quite big errors with big G. So I said, well, what if it's really changing? I mean, perhaps it is really changing. And then I looked at how they...
But it's probably the same thing I was talking about with the speed of light.
They do it. What happens is they measure it in different labs. They get different values on different days, and then they average them. And then other labs around the world do the same, and they come out usually with a rather different average. And then the International Committee on Metrology meets every 10 years or so and average the ones from labs around the world to come up with the value of big G. But what if G were actually fluctuating? What if...
Oh, Scientific American by Clara Moskowitz. Oh boy, I'm sure that this is the paragon of scientific research, and it's not a BS journal. I mean, you don't see many people winning the Nobel Prize who published in this journal, if it's even a journal. It looks like the Wall Street Journal.
Changed. There's already evidence, actually, that it changes throughout the day and throughout the year.
Oh my God, it changes by 0.002 every year. Wow.
What if the Earth, as it moves through the...
Wait a minute. There's no data points right here. What are you doing? So you have a data point here, some trends, and look at these error bars. I don't know how you can construct this relationship. This is just so incredibly dishonest. It's not even following it. Why doesn't he consider this? Or why is this one green? It's not following the sinusoidal trend. It's just a bunch of error bars. And look how close it is. Like, it's so hard to measure out to the sig fig. I'm sure that this isn't misconstrued
that it
at all.
changes
I'm sure he's presenting this very honestly.
Throughout the day and throughout the year. What if the Earth, as it moves through the galactic environment, went through patches of dark matter or other environmental factors that could alter it?
I hate the what ifs. He's like, what if it went through dark matter or whatever that could alter G? Well, what if it didn't? What if it didn't?
Maybe they all change together. What if these errors are going up together and down together?
It's so infinitesimal, these changes, and it's not even sinusoidal, as we saw, because it's not fit.
More than 10 years, I've been trying to persuade metrologists to look at the raw data. In fact, I'm now trying to persuade them to put it online on the internet with the dates and the actual measurements and see if they're correlated, to see if they're all up at one time, all down at another. If so, they might be fluctuating.
Well, they're not, because they're not being fit to a trend.
Together, and that would tell us something very, very interesting. But no one has done this. They haven't done it because G is a constant.
It's ridiculous.
There's no point looking for changes. You see, here's a very simple example of
G is fit to a specific definition, as you can see by these units of however they're measuring it. That's the whole point of a law. A definition is fixed to a fixed set of variables.
Tell us something very, very interesting. But no one has done this. They haven't done it because G is a constant. There's no point looking for changes.
Oh, those
You see,
Philistine
here's a very
scientists.
simple example of where...
If you could prove that G was wrong with sufficient evidence, you would win the Nobel Prize in physics. You would be highly rewarded for that, but you just have to have sufficient evidence instead of the, trust me, bro, I found some whack-ass paper that supports my claim.
A dogmatic assumption actually inhibits inquiry.
Maybe you're dogmatic with your morphic resonance. See, if you start throwing around dogma, you seem a lot more Philistine than other people. You just are rejecting everything and saying, look at the evidence.
I myself think that the constants may vary quite considerably, well, within narrow limits, but they may all be varying. And I think the day will come when scientific journals like Nature have a weekly report on the constants, like stock market reports in newspapers.
No. Probably not. Definitely not.
You know, this week Big G was slightly up, the charge on the electron was down, the speed of light held steady, and so on.
I don't know. I just buy puts on this guy's theory.
That's one area, just one area where I think thinking less dogmatically could open things up. One of the biggest areas is the nature of the mind. This is the most unsolved problem that science simply can't deal with the fact we're conscious. And it can't deal with the fact that our thoughts don't seem to be inside our brains. Our experiences don't all seem to be inside our brain. Your image of me now doesn't seem to be inside your brain, yet the official view is there's a little Rupert somewhere inside your head, and everything else in this room is inside your head. Your experience is inside your brain.
If you took out my brain, would I still be here? Probably not.
I'm suggesting, actually, that vision involves an outward projection of images. What you're seeing is in your mind, but not inside your head. Our minds are extended beyond our brains in the simplest act of perception. I think that we
People just say like the most crazy things and act like it's profound, but it's just a log of nothing, a log of BS.
Project out the images we're seeing, and these images touch what we're looking at. If I look at you from behind, you don't know I'm there. Could I affect you? Could you feel my gaze? There's a great deal of evidence that people can. The sense of being stared at is an extremely common experience, and recent experimental research suggests it's real. Animals seem to have it too. I think it probably evolved in the context of predator-prey relationships. Prey animals that could feel the gaze of a predator would survive better than those that couldn't. This would lead to a whole new way of thinking about ecological relationships between predators and prey, also about the extent of our minds.
You're probably aware that someone's near you. I mean, they probably saw you and think that you're looking at them if you're just standing there looking at them, which can feel a little disconcerting. It would be a simple experiment to do if you can have like a blind and have someone that does not know that you're looking at them look at you and see if you could feel it. But I mean, whatever, when you just throw all of the fundamentals away, you could prove anything.
If we look at distant stars, I think our minds reach out.
This is another thing these con men do. They're just like, look at this, look at this, look at this. If you just like consider this and look at this, everything's fake and I'm right about everything.
Out in a sense to touch those stars and literally extend out over astronomical distances.
What?
They're not just inside our heads. Now, it may seem astonishing that this is a topic of debate in the 21st century. We know so little about our own minds that where our images are is a hot topic of debate within consciousness studies right now.
What?
I don't have time of debate.
By Eric Holloway. Oh, a 4-minute read of just someone yapping on the internet. Wow. The paragon of evidence.
Within consciousness studies right now. I don't have time to deal with any more of these dogmas, but every single one of them is questionable. If one questions it, new forms of research, new possibilities open up. And I think as we question these dogmas that have held back science so long, science will undergo a reflowering, a renaissance.
And become exactly what you don't want it to be. It'll be a dogma, because we can't prove anything with evidence or rational thought. It'll just be on the vibes and how we feel.
I'm a total believer in the importance of science. I've spent my whole life as a research scientist, my whole career. But I think by moving beyond
You must have been pretty shite then.
these dogmas, it can be regenerated. Once again, it can become interesting and, I hope, life-affirming. Thank you.
Oh no, not poor Tesla. Okay, let's just take more quotes out of context. Poor Tesla. Get him off the screen. Well, I hope you learned some things about how con artists try to manipulate you and will sort of abuse your understanding of things and predate on kind of ambiguities to distort reality. Thank you for watching. Have a fantastic